A nurse's hands, trained to stop bleeding, become the hands that help topple a regime. A woman who never carried a gun becomes, to the state, more dangerous than men with rifles. And the cruelest contrast, the government that insists she is just a housewife will spend decades trying to cage her as if she were an army. The story begins with a clock already ticking. Even if she doesn't hear it yet, she is born in a country built on visible lines, roads, fences, passes, whites-only doors, and invisible ones, fear, hunger, the quiet. Instruction to know your place. Albertina Sisulu is born on 21st October 1918 in the Transkei, in a rural landscape where distance is measured not in kilometers, but in how many hours your feet can endure. Childhood here is not a soft place. It is early mornings and chores, the smell of wood smoke, the scrape of tin plates, the constant calculation of how to stretch a small meal across too many mouths. Her father dies when she is still young. The loss is not poetic. It is practical and brutal. One adult gone means the whole house tilts. You can almost see the family's future sliding off the table. Her mother works hard, yet the numbers never add up. And in that arithmetic of survival, school is a luxury that can vanish at any moment. But Albertina is sharp, stubborn, and quietly fearless. She studies as if learning itself is a rope she can throw to a different life. A church mission school becomes her door. It is also her first lesson in contradiction. The people who teach her discipline and reading also teach her obedience. The hymns speak of freedom while the world outside narrows. She learns English and isiXhosa with precision, learns to stand straight, to speak carefully. She also learns that good behavior will not protect you from a system designed to disregard you. Then comes the decision that pushes her story onto a collision course with power. She becomes a nurse. In the 1930s and early 1940s, nursing is one of the few professions open to black women that carries both respect and a wage. But it also places you at the nerve endings of society. A nurse sees what governments prefer to hide: malnutrition disguised as poverty, injuries dismissed as accidents, the slow violence of overcrowding, tuberculosis, and underpaid labor. The hospital is not separate from politics. It is politics with bandages. She trains in Johannesburg, the city that pulses like a machine. Gold beneath the soil, laws above it. Johannesburg is not simply bigger than home. It is louder, harsher, more organized in its cruelty. Past laws determine where you can live, where you can work, which streets you can safely walk. Police stop people like a reflex. You can be arrested for paperwork. Your whole life can be reduced to a stamp and a signature. Albertina is young, disciplined, and observant. She is not yet the name that will terrify officials. But the city begins to shape her. She sees how people are made small. She sees how women carry families on their backs while being treated as invisible. She sees how men come home exhausted from mines and factories, and how the state wants them exhausted, too tired to dream, too drained to fight. And then, in that same city, she meets a man who speaks as if fear is optional. Walter Sisulu is already moving through the underground currents of resistance. He is not loud for the sake of performance. He is intense in a way that makes you lean closer. Their connection is not a soft romance in a quiet corner of a cafe. It is two lives recognizing the same war. They marry in 1944. On paper, it's a wedding. In reality, it's a merger of destinies. Their home will not be merely a home. It will become a junction box for a movement. Meetings, whispered plans, footsteps arriving after dark. It will be a place where politics eats dinner at the table, sleeps on couches, hides in plain sight. And Albertina, still working, still nursing, still holding together the domestic universe, finds herself positioned at the edge of history front line. Here is the first twist, the first sharp turn that makes her story different from the standard wife of a leader narrative. She does not stand behind Walter, she grows into her own force. The work of resistance is not only speeches and headlines. It is logistics. It is courage that doesn't announce itself. It is keeping children calm while police prowl outside. It is delivering messages. It is listening, collecting information the way a nurse collects symptoms. She gives birth to children in a world that feels increasingly engineered to break families apart. The Sisulu household becomes crowded, not just with their own children, but with comrades, ideas, urgency. One of the young people moving through their orbit is Nelson Mandela, still forming into the figure the world will later mythologize. In those days, the struggle is not a museum exhibit. It is messy, risky, human, and Albertina is there, absorbing it, learning the rhythm of organizing, patience, pressure, timing. But the state is also learning. Apartheid hardens after 1948, when the National Party formalizes what had already been practiced. Segregation becomes a system with manuals. It becomes meticulous, and meticulous systems require meticulous resistance. For Albertina, the 1950s are not a single chapter. They are a tightening vice. Her nursing brings her into townships where the government's planning looks like cruelty dressed as administration. Forced removals hang in the air like a threat. Police raids become routine. And the pass laws, those small books of permission, become a leash. This is where her second transformation begins. She steps into organized women's resistance, and it's not symbolic participation. Women are often treated as support, as background noise to male leadership. But women know something the state underestimates. They run the real infrastructure of life. They know which homes have food, which streets are watched, which families can hide someone for a night. When women move together, a regime that relies on control starts to wobble. The government's obsession with control creates its own weakness, because the more it polices daily life, the more people feel the hand on their throat. In 1954, the Federation of South African Women forms, and Albertina becomes part of a rising tide. The language shifts from private frustration to public declaration. The struggle is no longer only about men's rights or workers' rights or one law at a time. It becomes a demand for human dignity in full. And then, in 1956, comes a moment like a drumbeat, a mass action that proves women are not accessories to history. Thousands of women converge on the Union buildings in Pretoria to protest past laws. Picture it, the Capitol's stone and order confronted by a flood of bodies moving with purpose. The air vibrates with a kind of bravery that makes your mouth go dry. Women stand shoulder to shoulder, many carrying babies, some wearing their best clothes, as if to say, "We will not be shamed into silence." They deliver petitions. They sing. They stand in silence, an eerie, controlled silence that feels more threatening than shouting. It is the kind of silence that forces a government to hear itself. Albertina is there, not as a visitor, not as a spectator. She is one of the women making the state feel the weight of their presence. And for a moment, the regime's confidence cracks. If women, supposed to be manageable, domestic, non-political, can organize like this, then what else is possible? But every act of defiance has a price, and the state is ready to collect. Now the key conflict begins to take a sharper shape. It is not only the people versus apartheid. It is also Albertina versus a particular face of the system. The security police, the special branch, men whose careers depend on proving they can break networks, isolate leaders, and terrify communities into obedience. For them, she is not a human being with a stethoscope and children. She is a node to be severed. They have a competitor's hunger for victory. And in their eyes, every meeting she attends, Every woman she mobilizes, every message she carries, is a point on a scoreboard. Albertina, meanwhile, is running a race with invisible rules. She must be careful enough to survive, bold enough to matter. She must keep a family intact while the state tries to fragment it. She must work as a nurse, because people need her, because income matters, while stepping deeper into politics that could cost her everything. The tension rises because she is now living two lives at once, and either one could collapse the other. And then the clock becomes audible. In the late 1950s, repression escalates. Arrests multiply. Banning orders, legal gags that restrict movement, speech, association, become the government's favorite tool. They don't always need to imprison you to erase you. They can make you a ghost in your own country. Imagine being told you cannot attend meetings, cannot be quoted, cannot speak to more than one person at a time. Imagine the humiliation of permission-based existence. Albertina watches comrades get picked off, detained, charged, acquitted, rearrested. The legal system becomes a revolving door designed to exhaust the soul. She learns to read the mood of the street, to recognize when surveillance is close. She learns to speak in ways that do not give the police what they want. She learns how quickly a normal day can turn into catastrophe. The rival, this machine of state power, does not sleep. It does not get tired. It does not worry about fairness. Its officers can ruin lives and still eat dinner without consequence. But Albertina has something the machine cannot manufacture: legitimacy inside her community, trust, and a kind of moral stamina that grows stronger the more pressure is applied. By 1959, by 1960, South Africa is a country trembling near a breaking point. The Sharpeville massacre is on the horizon like thunder, an event that will turn protest into blood and make the world look, if only briefly, with horror. Albertina cannot see the exact shape of what is coming, but she can feel the atmosphere change. More fear, more anger, more urgency. The movement is being pushed toward decisions that will redefine everything. And in the middle of it all is Albertina Sisulu, nurse, mother, organizer, becoming, step by step, the kind of opponent the apartheid state most hates. Because she is not reckless. She is methodical. She is not loud. She is consistent. She is not a headline. She is a backbone. And the state's competitor, special branch, apartheid bureaucracy, the men who count victories by counting broken families, finally begins to treat her as what she truly is, a threat, which means the next move will not be a warning, it will be a strike. And as the 1960s approach, one question tightens like a noose around her ordinary days. When the crackdown finally comes for the Sisulu home, will Albertina have enough time to protect her children, protect the network, and protect herself? Before the door splinters, before names are shouted, before the law is used like a weapon? The clock is ticking now, loudly, and her rival is already at the gate. Part 1, approx. 10,600 characters, including spaces. The first time they come for her, it is not with a roar, but with a knock that sounds almost polite. That is the cruelty. History does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it slips in through the front door while the children are still eating breakfast. The Sharpeville massacre has just ripped through South Africa like a scream. 69 people shot dead, many of them in the back, their bodies bleeding into the dust because they dared to walk to a police station without passes. The world calls it a tragedy. The government calls it necessary force. In the townships, people call it what it feels like, a message. You are not citizens. You are targets. Albertina hears the news, not from a radio bulletin, but from the faces of her patients. Bullet wounds, beatings, the sharp smell of fear on clothes. She washes blood from the skin of strangers, knowing that the stain is political. Nursing, which once felt like a way to save lives, now feels like triage in a war where one side has uniforms and laws, and the other has cardboard placards and hope. Then the state of emergency is declared. Overnight, legality becomes a weapon with many shapes: detention without trial, mass arrests, bans on meetings. The air thickens with rumors. Who has been taken? Who has disappeared? Who is next? The clock that had been ticking softly in the background now feels like it has been placed directly against her chest. One morning, there they are, special branch officers at the Sisulu home. Coats, notebooks, the cold efficiency of men who believe they are the heroes of order. They have lists of names and the calm of people who know they will never be on any list themselves. Albertina's children watch as their mother is taken away. For them, this is the first brutal twist. The person who bandages their knees, who wakes them for school, who keeps the chaotic world at bay, is suddenly the one being led out of the front door by strangers. The house, always a nerve center of the movement, tilts into a different kind of silence. Detention is meant to break rhythm. The security police know that resistance relies on patterns, meetings, messages, routines. If you disrupt the pattern, you weaken the whole network. They don't even need a conviction. They just need time. 90 days, 180, indefinite, holding. In those cells, time becomes both a punishment and a weapon. They interrogate her. They do not understand the quiet armor she has been building for years. A nurse learns to stay calm when others panic, to listen beneath the noise for the truth of a heartbeat. Now she uses that training differently, listening past their questions, past their threats, for the shape of the strategy behind them. What do they already know? What are they fishing for? Which names are they baiting her to confirm? They offer her the usual bargains. Distance yourself from politics. Help them. They will look after her family. It is a competitor's move, like offering to buy out your rival's best player. They want to remove her from the opposing team and place her, if not on their side, then at least off the field. She refuses. This is where the rivalry sharpens into something almost personal. The special branch is not just the faceless arm of apartheid. It becomes an opponent with memory. Every time she says no, every time she refuses to bend, she is not just defying the system. She is embarrassing particular men whose success is measured in broken wills. They file her name with a little more irritation each time. They will be back. Released from detention, she comes home changed, but not in the way they intended. The bars have not shrunk her. They have clarified her. She returns to a house under surveillance. Phones click. Strangers linger at corners. Children learn too early to recognize an unmarked car. Yet inside those walls, something else is happening. Something that the regime failed to predict. The absence of male leaders. Detained. Banned, driven underground, is pushing women into the center. In meeting after meeting, in whispered conversations across kitchen tables, a new reality dawns. The men are being systematically removed from public life. If the struggle is to continue, women must step up, not as placeholders, but as leaders. It is less a declaration than a necessity, and necessity has its own kind of authority. Albertina does not decide to rise. She is pulled upward by circumstances until she finds herself, almost without noticing the exact moment, in a role that looks suspiciously like leadership. She takes on more organizing in ANC-aligned structures and in the women's movement. When people come to the house, they often find that Walter is already under some restriction or away on underground business. They speak to Albertina instead and discover that her political grasp is as firm as her husband's. The network begins to loop through her more and more. The state notices. If Sharpeville marked the beginning of open terror, the early 1960s marked the shift from mass protest to underground struggle. The government bans the ANC and other organizations. Armed resistance begins to grow in the shadows. Police raids intensify. It is a period when a single knock on the door can mean anything from a casual check to the start of a life sentence. For the Sisulu family, the pressure has a countdown. The Rivonia arrests are approaching. Walter is already a marked man. He has gone underground, moving from safe house to safe house. For Albertina, every day is a gamble with time. Can she keep the children's routine intact, keep up her nursing shifts, maintain contact with the movement, and still protect whatever crumbs of normality are left before the next raid shatters the illusion? One night, the answer arrives. News spreads. A police raid on a farm at Rivonia, leaders arrested, documents seized. The underground headquarters exposed, the top layer of the movement ripped out in a single operation. Walter is among those taken. Here, the rival scores what it believes is a decisive victory. In their offices, special branch men turn the news into statistics, into self-congratulation. They believe they have decapitated the resistance. They assume the wives and families will crumble into manageable grief. Albertina is not given time to process her own shock. Almost immediately, she is thrown into crisis management. Relatives call, comrades arrive, journalists hover, children ask questions with eyes that are already learning to expect bad news. She has to function as mother, spokesperson, organizer, all at once. There is another cruel time limit now, stamped not in hours, but in weeks and months. The Rivonia trial. She travels to attend hearings when she can, threading her life through court dates and prison visits. The courtroom becomes another kind of hospital ward, one where the illness is power. She watches as the state builds its case, brick by brick, using confiscated documents and coerced testimony. She watches Walter and the others sit in the dock, dignified, knowing that the best outcome is life imprisonment instead of the gallows. The verdict is delivered like an axe that doesn't bother to hide its blade. Life sentences. Robben Island. This is a twist that would break many families in half. The state intends it to. Life imprisonment is not just about removing one man. It is about sending a message to his community. Your leaders are ghosts now. Forget them. Move on. Albertina does not move on. She moves differently. With Walter locked away, the Sisulu household becomes both more vulnerable and more important. The special branch circles it like a shark. Every visit she makes to Robben Island is logged. Every conversation she has is monitored. The rival believes it holds the upper hand. They have taken the husband, caged the friend, exiled the father. Surely the wife will soften. Surely the pressure will turn her into something more cautious. Instead, an unofficial title begins to stick to her. Mother of the Nation. It is not yet widespread, not yet printed in large letters, but the feeling is there. People come to her not only because she is Walter's partner, but because she herself has become a moral reference point. When she speaks, even quietly, people listen as if the words are weighed in a different currency. The state responds with its favorite tool, banning. A banning order is administrative strangulation. It says, you may not attend gatherings. You may not be quoted. You may not move freely. In some periods, she is banned from even entering certain townships without permission. In others, she must report regularly to police stations. Her daily routine turned into an enforced confession of existence. The order is a clock with legal teeth. Miss a check-in, misread a restriction, and prison waits. Every errand, every visit, every clandestine meeting has to be measured against the schedule of control. Can she meet this person before curfew? Can she reach that house and return without crossing a forbidden zone? The rival has turned time itself into a trap. Yet here, again, is the twist. The more they try to shrink her world, the more clearly defined her purpose becomes. A banned person is supposed to be a shadow, but Albertina's shadow spills beyond the edges of the paper they try to confine her to. She finds ways to work within and around the restrictions. A simple visit to a neighbor can double as political education. A conversation in a clinic queue can become a strategy session. She learns the art of saying everything while appearing to say nothing. At home, her children grow up on the front line without ever enrolling. They learn to whisper when certain names are mentioned. They learn which doors to bolt and which to leave, looking ordinary. Some will later enter the struggle themselves, not because anyone drafted them, but because history moved into their living room and refused to leave. The special branch keeps coming back, each time convinced that this will be the moment she breaks. There is an especially vicious episode in the mid-1960s when she is detained under draconian new security laws, 90 days without trial, in conditions designed to erode the mind. The lights, the isolation, the endless questions about the ANC, about underground structures, about people she loves. The officers try everything, from intimidation to fake friendliness. They are not just fishing for information. They are trying to rewrite her loyalties. One day, exhausted, she collapses in her cell. For a moment, her body betrays what her spirit refuses to admit, that there is a price for carrying this much strain. Word leaks out that she has fallen ill in detention. Outside, people wait for news that could go either way, release or funeral. She recovers. The regime learns an infuriating lesson. You can imprison a body and still fail to capture the will that drives it. By the 1970s, South Africa is changing again. The student uprisings at Soweto are approaching. A new generation is stepping into the arena, and the apartheid state is responding. With even more militarized paranoia, townships are policed as if they are hostile territories. Funerals become protests. Protests become funerals. The cycle feeds on itself. In this atmosphere, Albertina's authority deepens. Younger activists, including many from the emerging Black consciousness movement, cross paths with her. Some arrive at her home as strangers and leave feeling they have been in the presence of someone who has already survived the worst. The state can offer and remained intact. Her resilience is a kind of quiet training program. Proof that long-distance resistance is possible. The rivalry between her and the security apparatus by now has the flavor of a long campaign. They know her routines. She knows their tricks. They tighten restrictions. She adapts. They arrest her. Communities rally. They try to isolate her. Her moral influence spreads by word of mouth, by stories told in queues, on buses, in church halls. The more the regime insists that she is just one woman to be handled, the more she becomes, in the eyes of millions, something else. Evidence that the system has not yet reached its limit of cruelty, and that people have not yet reached their limit of courage. But there is another clock ticking in the background now, one that neither she nor her rival can fully control. International opinion is shifting, slowly but undeniably. Images of massacres, of children shot in the streets, of mass funerals, and armored vehicles in townships are leaking out more frequently. Sanctions are being discussed in foreign capitals. The economic cost of repression is rising. Inside South Africa, that shift translates into urgency. If change is coming, how many more years of sacrifice will it demand? How many more detentions? How many more funerals? How many more mothers standing at gravesides with clenched jaws? For Albertina, the question sharpens into something painfully personal. Will Walter live to see the end of this? Will she? Or will they both become names on posters, remembered as pioneers who never saw the horizon they walked toward? Her days continue to be cut into small, controlled pieces by the regime's legal machinery. Yet within those pieces, she pushes hardest when it seems least possible. Her rival in this contest, the apartheid state, with its files and prisons and guns, is racing to shut down the future. She, with her patient, methodical persistence, is racing to keep it open for just a little longer, because she knows something from years in hospital wards. The most dangerous moment is often just before a patient turns the corner. That is when infection rages, when fevers spike, when the body fights hardest and looks weakest. South Africa, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, looks feverish. The regime believes this is proof that more force is needed. Albertina reads it differently. To her, the rising chaos feels like a body fighting an illness it can no longer tolerate. And as the next wave of resistance begins to gather, the community organizations, the unions, the new alliances that will soon knit into a national front, Albertina Sisulu, repeatedly banned, yet impossible to erase, stands ready. Her rival is still watching. The clock is still ticking, and the battlefield is about to expand from the streets and cells into something larger. The very idea of who has the right to govern, a country built on stolen land and silenced voices. They think they have already beaten her. By the early 1980s, the apartheid state has Walter locked away for life on Robben Island. Many ANC leaders are imprisoned or in exile, and Albertina Sisulu is a name buried under layers of banning orders. On paper, the scoreboard looks decisive. The regime has the guns, the prisons, the laws. She has a cramped house in Soweto, failing, phones, and a body worn out by years of arrests and interrogations. But paper is exactly where the regime makes its fatal mistake. Because in the streets, in the clinics, in crowded living rooms, lit by single dim bulbs, a different reality is taking shape. And at the center of it stands a woman who appears to the security police to be just one more tired, middle-aged nurse who should have given up years ago. They are about to discover that they have misread both her and the moment. The new decade arrives like a pressure cooker. A whole generation of young people has grown up knowing nothing but past laws, police raids, and funerals. They have watched their brothers and cousins fall in the Soweto uprising of 1976. They have seen armored vehicles roll past their schools. They have memorized the taste of tear gas before they have memorized their algebra. These are the children who come to Albertina's doorstep. Sometimes they come literally, knocking on the Sisulu door in Orlando West, asking for advice, for a place to sleep, for help finding a safe route out of the country to join the ANC in exile. Sometimes they come indirectly, through whispered messages. Mama, the youth in this street are planning a meeting. Or Mama, the police are making lists again. She listens. In the world of underground politics, listening is strategy. She hears the same pattern over and over. Communities are angry, but they are also scattered, reactive, exhausted from putting out fires that never stop. Protests erupt, are crushed, erupt again elsewhere. Energy is high. Coordination is weak. The rival, the apartheid state, exploits exactly that. It isolates township from township, union from student movement, church group from civic association. What if that changed? What if, instead of 100 small brush fires, there was a single roaring front? The idea is not new. Underground ANC structures have been dreaming of a broad internal front for years, but ideas need people to anchor them. And in the early 1980s, the person who will help give this idea a local heartbeat is a woman the state keeps trying to erase from public life. Despite being banned, despite needing police permission to leave certain areas, Albertina begins to pour herself into the slow, dangerous work of stitching organizations together, civic groups fighting rent increases, church organizations denouncing injustice, student committees, women's groups, trade unions, all are part of the same wounded body. She helps them start to feel like it. This is not done at rallies with microphones. It happens in cramped kitchens where the teapot never cools down. It happens in clinics where she moves from patient to patient, pausing just long enough to whisper, "There is a meeting on Friday. Come if you can. Bring others you trust." It happens in church halls, where prayers for the nation slide, almost imperceptibly, into strategic discussions about boycotts and demonstrations. The state, sensing something, tightens its grip. Security police cars idle outside her street for hours. Men in cheap suits loiter near the clinic. They cannot attend the meetings she organizes, but they can pick up the tremor of something bigger being built. Each movement she makes is supposed to be checked against her banning order. Each trip, a permission slip waiting to be denied. Here, the rivalry becomes a dance against the clock. Every organizing visit must be squeezed into tiny legal windows. If she has permission to travel from Soweto to another township for what is officially a family matter or a church gathering, she must calculate how many people can she see before she must sign in at the police station again. How many alliances can she strengthen before curfew drops like a steel shutter? The state thinks these time limits will strangle her work. Instead, they sharpen it. When you only have 30 minutes, idle chatter dies quickly. Conversations cut to the bone. Who can be trusted? Where is the next march? Which families need support after last week's arrests? Who will carry messages when the phones go dead? Piece by piece, the underground web thickens. And then, like a figure emerging from fog, a three-letter acronym steps into history. UDF. The United Democratic Front is not born in a blaze of fireworks, but in a series of painstaking consultations that people like Albertina help steer. When it is officially launched in 1983, bringing together hundreds of organizations under one umbrella, the regime initially dismisses it as just another boycott front. They underestimate its reach. They underestimate the woman they have tried for decades to sideline. Albertina Sisulu becomes one of its deputy presidents. On paper, this is absurd. A banned person, technically silenced, now holds a senior leadership position in the country's most important internal anti-apartheid alliance. The contradiction itself becomes a kind of quiet rebellion. The moment her name appears on organizational lists, the rival feels the sting. Despite all their laws, they have not managed to keep her out of the arena. The personal stakes rise immediately. The special branch regards the UDF as a direct challenge, an internal extension of the banned ANC. They move to crush it with familiar tools: raids, detentions, torture, trials. For Albertina, the danger is not theoretical. She knows exactly what a police cell looks like from the inside, knows the scorecards the interrogators keep in their heads. Who can be broken? Who can be flipped? Who must be destroyed? By now, she is in her mid-60s. Her blood pressure is unstable. She has been in and out of hospitals with heart problems. Friends and relatives beg her to slow down. She looks at the young activists flooding into the movement and does the opposite. If anything, she accelerates. She throws herself into campaign after campaign. Consumer boycotts, rent boycotts, protests against the new tricameral parliament that offers sham representation to Indians and coloreds, but none to the black majority. The streets are turning into a permanent battlefield, and she is in the thick of it, marching, speaking when she can, strategizing when she cannot. The rivalry between her and the security police by now has an almost bitter intimacy. They know her address, her children's names, the rhythm of her footsteps on the floorboards. She knows their faces, their methods, the way their eyes flicker when she refuses to answer a question. They have spent years trying to break her. Now they are forced to watch as she helps create a movement that multiplies her defiance across thousands of households. So they escalate. 1983, 1984, 1985. These are years when the township sky often glows at night from burning tires. The state declares states of emergency, unleashing the army into black neighborhoods as if they are foreign enemy territory. Curfews, mass arrests, torture become routine. Albertina is at the epicenter. Her home turns into a revolving door of grief and planning. Mothers whose children have been killed or disappeared, youths on the run, union organizers seeking a safe place to sleep for a night. She keeps going to work as a nurse as long as her health allows it. Then, when forced to retire, turns what others might call old age into full-time resistance. It is in this cauldron that the state makes a move that could have ended everything. In 1985, she is arrested under emergency regulations. This is not the first time, and the police clearly intend it not to be the last. But this detention is different in scale and context. She is no longer just the wife of a Rivonia trialist or a local organizer. She is now a senior UDF figure, a symbol whose imprisonment carries national and international ripples. They throw her into solitary confinement. Imagine it. A woman in her late 60s, heart problems, locked alone in a cell, denied visits, cut off from the noise and heartbeat of the communities she has fought for her entire adult life. The enemy knows that this environment, quiet, sterile, without witnesses, is where minds can be broken more efficiently than bones. They interrogate, they threaten, they hint darkly at what could happen to her children. They speak in that cold, bureaucratic language that hides violence behind phrases like security risk and preventive detention. She knows the game. She knows, too, that time is not on her side. Her body cannot endure indefinite confinement. She might not make it out alive this time. But here, in this suffocating slowness, something paradoxical happens. While she sits in silence, outside, her name gets louder. The apartheid regime, so obsessed with isolating and minimizing her, has trapped itself in its own contradiction. The more they lock her away, the more people talk about her. Churches hold vigils. Women's groups pass around petitions. International anti-apartheid networks put her face on posters. An aging nurse, a banned activist, a mother whose husband has been imprisoned for over 2 decades, still being targeted. The rival has made her the unwilling star of their own cruelty. After months behind bars, she is eventually released. The state, staring down a flood of bad publicity and growing unrest, decides, for now, that it is more convenient to have her under watch in Soweto than martyred in a cell. She emerges thin, tired, but unbroken. In a purely physical sense, she has obviously been damaged. Detention leaves marks you cannot always see, but in the psychological battlefield, where this rivalry has always been fought, her release is a spectacular own goal for the regime. They wanted a warning. They have created a heroine. She returns immediately to the vortex. Funerals, strategy meetings, late-night visits to families who have nothing left but a framed photograph of a child in a school uniform. She speaks quietly, without slogans. When she says, "We must continue," it carries more weight than any shouted speech in a stadium. By the late 1980s, the conflict has become a race none of the participants can time precisely. Sanctions are cutting deep. The economy is straining. The townships are in near-permanent uprising. International pressure is intensifying. The security establishment feels history slipping from its fingers and responds with even more violence. A desperate attempt to freeze a river that has already broken its banks. Albertina feels the clock in her bones. She is moving towards 70. Each new arrest hits harder. Each march aches more in her joints. Each funeral is heavier than the last. The question she carries like a stone is simple and merciless. Will I live to see freedom, or will all this be left for others to complete? She does not know, and the not knowing is its own punishment. But she has a rival in this uncertainty. The very state that believes it will last forever is also haunted by a countdown. How long can it hold power by force alone? How long before soldiers refuse to shoot? How long before business leaders, priests, and foreign governments decide apartheid is simply too expensive to maintain? Into this tension, a new possibility creeps: negotiation. It begins in rumors. Whispers that Nelson Mandela, still on Robben Island, has been secretly meeting government officials. speculation that some in the ruling National Party are looking for an exit route that will keep their wealth while sacrificing their ideology. To many activists, the idea sounds like a trap. To Albertina, it sounds like a fragile window that might close at any moment. The rival shifts shape yet again. The security branch that used to burst through doors with boots and rifles now sends people in suits, talks about talks. They are still dangerous, but in a different way. Now they try to moderate, to co-opt, to divide. The old clarity of defiance against a purely brutal opponent blurs into something murkier. When do you negotiate with the very people who have tortured your friends? At what point does compromise become betrayal? Her own household mirrors this tightrope. Walter, after more than 25 years in prison, is suddenly moved in 1989 from Robben Island to a house in Johannesburg, under guard as part of the regime's experiments in pre-release discussions. It is a strange, surreal half-freedom. He is closer yet still caged, visible yet not fully accessible. For Albertina, the emotional shock is almost unbearable. She has trained herself for decades to live as if life imprisonment truly meant what it said. Her love has been recalibrated around prison visits, letters censored and delayed, fleeting glances in grim visiting rooms. Now, unexpectedly, there is the possibility of waking up one day with Walter not as a voice behind glass, but as a man in their kitchen. But that day is not guaranteed. Every rumor of impending release comes with its twin. Rumors of crackdowns, of right-wing coups, of death squads roaming the townships. To derail any hope of peaceful transition, she is trapped in a countdown with no visible numbers. And then, history jumps. February 1990. The world watches as F.U. de Klerk announces the unbanning of the ANC and other organizations. Within days, with a stride that rewrites the century, Nelson Mandela walks out of Victor Verster prison, his fist raised, his grey hair gleaming in the sun. TV crews swarm. Crowds scream. The story, to outsiders, seems simple. The long walk to freedom has finally reached the gates. For Albertina, watching this unfold, the moment is both triumph and warning. Yes, the movement she has given her life to is now legal. Yes, her comrades are being released. Yes, her own official status as a banned person begins to evaporate. But she knows the rival is not dead. It has only changed tactics. The security forces are still armed. Vigilante groups and shadowy hit squads still prowl the townships. Power is slipping, but it is not yet surrendered. The competition for the future of South Africa has entered its most dangerous phase. Open negotiation under the shadow of possible collapse. Albertina steps into this new world with a role that surprises even those who think they know her story. She becomes, formally and informally, part of the complex machine preparing the ANC for legal mass politics. She helps re-energize women's structures, now no longer clandestine, but still facing the same old patriarchal reflexes. Many male comrades, returning from prison or exile, slip easily back into leadership positions, often assuming that women will naturally take supporting roles again. She has spent 3 decades proving the opposite. In community halls and strategy rooms, she pushes relentlessly for women to be represented, not as decorative symbols of liberation, but as decision-makers. She argues that the sacrifice women have made, in cells, in kitchens, stretched to feed 10 people with food for 2, in endless queues, at mortuaries, must be reflected in the new political order. It is another rivalry layered inside the larger one. Not just black against white rule, but women against the habits of male-dominated politics, even within the liberation movement itself. There are moments of bitter disappointment, meetings where women are talked over, committees where her suggestions are quietly sidelined, but there are also turning points. The gradual strengthening of the ANC Women's League, the emergence of bold younger leaders who have grown up watching her endurance and are no longer willing to wait politely at the margins. Even as the grand drama of constitutional talks and codicil negotiations plays out on television, she remains anchored in the streets, where the cost of every delay is counted in bodies. Because violence does not stop just because political parties are meeting in conference centers. In the early 1990s, townships around Johannesburg and across the country are torn apart by clashes often framed as black-on-black conflict, battles between ANC-aligned structures and Inkatha Freedom Party supporters, sometimes openly stoked by the security establishment. In a strategy of destabilization, funerals multiply again. Albertina goes from house to house, comforting families who cannot understand how, in a time of talks, their sons are still coming home in coffins. She attends mass funerals, where rows of coffins line dusty soccer fields, the air heavy with anger and the sharp, metallic smell of grief. The rival she has always known, cold, white, official, now hides behind more ambiguous masks. Third forces, covert units, unknown men, in balaclavas firing from passing cars. The line between state and death squad blurs. The countdown to democracy is being sabotaged in blood. She absorbs it all and refuses to flinch. If anything, the stakes drive her harder. She pushes for discipline in the movement, for preventing revenge killings, for maintaining moral ground even when rage threatens to tear it apart from the inside. She understands the trap. If the struggle descends into uncontrolled violence, the forces of apartheid can point and say, "See, they are not ready to govern," which brings her to yet another frontier. In 1991, with the ANC unbanned and operating openly, she is elected as deputy president of the ANC Women's League. She travels abroad, representing this new legal movement in forums that once only heard from exiles. In 1994, in the country's first democratic elections, she will be elected to parliament. But that is tomorrow's history. For now, in the early 1990s, she stands in a liminal space, no longer living in the illegal underground, not yet part of a democratic government. It is a narrow bridge over a pit of possible failure. If negotiations collapse, if right-wing militias or military hardliners force a coup, everything could shatter in days. The countdown is now measured in deadlines for talks, in dates for elections that keep being discussed, delayed, threatened, and always beneath it, the private ticking of a woman who knows that her time on earth is finite. She has carried the movement through the darkest years. She has outlasted bans, beatings, exile by proxy. She has raised children mostly alone, while her husband sat behind bars. She has seen a generation of young activists die before they had a chance to grow old. Now, as the possibility of freedom edges into view, the question narrows again. Will she actually sit, in her own lifetime, in a parliament, elected by all South Africans? Will she watch, with her own eyes, a government formed by the very movement for which she has risked everything? Her rival knows the same question in reverse. Can the architects of apartheid hand over power without retribution? Can they protect their wealth and influence while conceding the vote? In this race, there is no neutral ground. Every step toward democracy is contested. Every concession is tugged at from multiple sides. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a 70-something nurse from Soweto, who once simply wanted to heal bodies, has become one of the moral surgeons of a nation, helping, with unglamorous precision, to cut away the gangrene without killing the patient. She has never had a motorcade. She has never worn a general's stars. Her weapons have always been far simpler. A notebook, a stubborn gaze, a hand steady enough to hold someone who is breaking. Her rival has been an entire state. Yet, as the 1990s grind forward, one thing becomes increasingly, almost unbearably clear. The state's time is running out faster than hers. And when the first free election date is finally announced, April 27th, 1994, the clock that has been ticking in her life for more than half a century suddenly acquires a number she can hold, a day she can circle on a calendar, a finish line she might actually reach before her own heartbeat does what no police officer ever could, and quietly brings her struggle to an end. The night before the election, she barely sleeps. Outside, Soweto is buzzing like a living wire. Windows glow long past midnight. Neighbors drift between houses, with thermos flasks and camp chairs, sharing rumors, how long the queues will be, which polling stations are safest, whether the ballot papers will get lost somewhere between township and counting center. For 50 years, Albertina Sisulu has trained herself to expect betrayal at the last moment. Every time hope grew too bright, after Sharpeville, after Soweto, after the first whispers of negotiation, it was met with rubber bullets, banning orders, sudden deaths in police cells. What if this is another trap? What if, at dawn, the streets fill with armored vehicles instead of voters? She lies in the dark, listening to the faint hum of radios wedged against ears all over the township. The countdown now has hours, not years. 6, 5, 4, until the sky finally lifts from black to deep blue, and a sound reaches her that no one in the apartheid government ever truly believed they might hear. People singing on their way to vote. Not at a rally, not under party flags, but in informal groups, on foot, in the half-light of morning. Old women in headscarves, young men in donated shirts, parents carrying toddlers. They are walking toward polling stations as if they are walking toward water in a drought. There are no tanks, no army blockade, no last-minute declaration of a security emergency. The rival has blinked. She dresses more slowly than she used to. The bones hurt. The heart is unpredictable. Every movement feels like it is happening in 2 times at once. The brittle present and the long history that brought her here. As she buttons her dress, her fingers hesitate. What do you wear when you are going to vote for the first time in your life at 75? In the end, she chooses something ordinary. The point is not what she looks like. The point is that she, Albertina Sisulu, banned person, detainee, widowed by prison, will stand in a line with millions of others and mark a ballot the state cannot legally throw away. When she steps out into the street, the sight hits her like a physical blow. The queue already curls along the dusty road, past corner shops, around the block, almost vanishing into the morning haze. People who used to avoid gathering in groups for fear of police vans now stand shoulder to shoulder, patient, smiling, clutching ID books like fragile passports to another universe. Some recognize her. They step aside, murmur, "Mama Sisulu, please, go forward." She refuses. She has stood in too many unequal lines in her life. Separate entrances for Europeans and non-Europeans, segregated hospital wards, humiliating queues for passes. Today, the equality must be real in the smallest things. So she waits. Time, which for decades has been her adversary, suddenly feels generous. An hour in this line is not a burden. It is a victory lap. She chats quietly with the woman in front of her, who says, almost shyly, "I was afraid this day would come after we had died, Mama." Albertina answers, "I was afraid of the same thing." When at last she reaches the door of the polling station, a school building she has visited before, when police used to patrol the corridors during protests, there is a moment of almost unbearable stillness. She steps inside. The air smells of dust, fresh paper, nervous sweat. An election official explains how to fold the ballot, where to make the mark. She nods, but part of her is far away, back in a small rural village where, as a girl, She woke before sunrise to walk to school, never imagining that politics, let alone a vote, would be the axis of her life. Now, pen in hand, she faces the names and symbols on the paper, African National Congress. For everyone else, it is the leading party in this election, led by a man whose face has become known across the world. For her, it is more intimate, whispered initials in safe houses, smuggled pamphlets, ghostly presences of comrades dead or exiled. She makes her cross. It is an absurdly small motion. No shouted slogan, no raised fist, just ink on paper. Yet, in that tiny cross, she buries half a century of rivalry with a system that insisted she would never be fully human, never a citizen, never part of the people whose will counted. When she drops the folded ballot into the box and hears it land among thousands of others, a strange, fierce calm settles over her. The race, for this moment at least, has ended. Outside, the queue is even longer. Some will wait all day. Some will refuse to leave, even when the sun burns and feet swell. The apartheid state, for all its arrogance, miscalculated the simplest thing of all: how stubbornly people will wait for a chance at dignity. For the next 3 days, as voting continues and counting begins, the entire country holds its breath. There are rumors of right-wing plots, trucks of white supremacist militants driving toward Johannesburg, talk of bombs in the city, of coups in the barracks. The rival is dying, but a dying beast is often most dangerous. Albertina moves between home, community halls, and ANC offices, watching updates on flickering televisions she never expected to live to see. Each new tally, each colored bar on the screen, pushes the old order further into the past. When the final outcome becomes clear, when it is undeniable that the ANC has won and Nelson Mandela will be president, she sheds no dramatic tears in front of cameras. That is not her way. But in the quiet of her living room, she allows herself a private admission. We did not lose. We were not too late. The rivalry that has defined her adult life does not end in a courtroom execution, a late-night raid, or a forgotten grave. It ends in a legal document, in broadcast announcements, in peaceful celebrations that wind through townships until dawn. And then, almost immediately, another countdown begins. Because now comes the question that separates romantics from revolutionaries. You have won the right to govern. Can you actually govern? Transition is not a magic trick. Overnight, the same crumbling clinics, overcrowded schools, and jobless youth remain. The same grieving parents wake up with their loss. The same police stations still stand, their walls soaked in the memory of screams. The rival changes shape again. It is no longer a single, obvious enemy in uniform. It is poverty. It is bureaucratic inertia. It is the silted-up habits of officials who have spent years obeying orders instead of serving people. It is the temptation, in the new leadership, to enjoy power rather than dismantle the structures that abused it. In 1994, when Albertina Sisulu is sworn in as a member of parliament, she steps into this new battlefield. The ceremony in Cape Town is rich with symbolism. The same parliament that for generations passed laws to strip black people of land, movement and dignity is now filled with faces that once appeared only in mugshots or wanted posters. Former prisoners, exiles, and underground organizers sit on green leather benches, rubbing shoulders with remnants of the old National Party. Albertina, in her mid-70s, stands among them. The building smells of polished wood and old power. Portraits of past white male leaders still hang on the walls, watching, frozen in oil paint, as the descendants of those they tried to crush take seats they never designed for them. Some of the younger ANC MPs look at her with awe. This is Mama, the one who held the line when they were children. Some of the old guard politicians look at her with a different kind of calculation. Here is a woman whose moral authority cannot be easily co-opted. Parliament is a strange environment for someone who has spent her life in streets and cramped kitchens. The language is formal, ritualized. There are rules about when you may speak, how you must address others. The rival here is subtler, endless debate that risks collapsing into performance. She has no interest in performance. In committee meetings, she is not the loudest voice, but when she speaks, it is with the bluntness of someone who has wrapped too many bodies in sheets to tolerate political theater. She pushes on issues that to some seem small, but to her are the bones of justice, access to decent health care, support for families of the disappeared, recognition of women's unpaid labor. One of the sharpest fronts of rivalry she encounters in these years is not between black and white, but between rhetoric and reality. There are soaring speeches about women's empowerment, about honoring the contributions of mothers to the struggle. There are glossy event programs with her photograph and noble quotes. But in the budget lines, in the staffing decisions, in the slow-moving machinery of the state, old gender hierarchies reassert themselves. She watches young male comrades sliding comfortably into ministerial positions, entourages in tow. Some remember the long years when they called her for help. Others begin, subtly, to see her as part of the old guard, useful for ceremony, less central to decision-making. It is a bitter irony. The woman who helped hold the movement together when its leaders were jailed or exiled must now fight not to be gently pushed to the sidelines in the very democracy she helped create. Her response is typical of her. She forms alliances. Within the ANC Women's League, she mentors a new wave of leaders emerging from the 1990s generation. Many of these women are less patient with male dominance than their elders. They carry the fire of youth and the legitimacy of having been part of the street battles of the 1980s. She encourages them to demand quotas, to insist on being in core committees, not just women's desks. At the same time, she uses her parliamentary position to amplify voices from the ground, nurses from under-resourced clinics, community organizers from squatter camps, widows seeking pensions. They find in her an MP who listens in the way she always has, as strategy, not charity. But the clock is no longer just political. It is biological. Her heart problems worsen. Travel is exhausting. Long sessions in Parliament strain a body already shaped by years of hunger, stress, nights on prison floors. Doctors advise her to slow down, to consider focusing on fewer responsibilities. She hears them. Then she looks at the country outside the parliamentary bubble. The first years of democracy are heady and chaotic. There is euphoria, yes, but also spiking crime, growing economic inequality, gangs feeding off old fault lines. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission begins its hearings, opening a wound on live television. Albertina pays close attention to the TRC. She attends sessions where mothers testify about sons who vanished into security police vans. She listens to former apartheid operatives describe torture chambers with chilling detachment. She watches Archbishop Desmond Tutu weep openly as he reads amnesty applications. For many, the TRC is an abstract national process. For her, it is personal inventory. Every confession scrubs at the fog of uncertainty that has surrounded the deaths and disappearances of comrades. Every account of a midnight raid, of a body dumped on a roadside, connects to a face she once hugged goodbye at a meeting. The rival that once tried to erase itself behind unknown persons and accidental deaths is forced to sign its name in sworn statements next to its crimes. Does this bring her peace? Not exactly. She has never been under the illusion that truth alone can heal everything. Some perpetrators show remorse. Others sound like accountants balancing a moral ledger. Some victims forgive, others refuse. The country, like an individual after trauma, staggers between relief and rage. Her role in this phase is quieter, but no less vital. She visits families still waiting for remains to be identified, for graves to be found. She speaks at small gatherings, reminding people that reconciliation without justice is just another word for forgetting. Yet that revenge, too, carries a price the poor will pay first. If, in apartheid times, her rivalry was with a state that wanted to crush political resistance, now it is with a new danger: despair. There is a risk that once the ceremonies and reports are over, people will look around at their cramped houses and think, is this all our struggle has brought us? A different flag, a different anthem, but the same empty pots? She refuses to let that narrative harden. Again and again, in interviews, at community meetings, in Parliament, she emphasizes that political freedom is the foundation, not the ceiling. She speaks of democracy as a tool, not a trophy, something you use, repair when damaged, sharpen against complacency. By 1998, approaching 80, she steps down from Parliament. Some interpret this as the end of her public life. They do not understand her. Positions were always just one of her tools. Presence has always been her real power. Without the constraints of parliamentary procedure, she returns more fully to the rhythms that once sustained her. Community work, speaking engagements, women's organizing, the behind-the-scenes knitting of networks. There is a twist here many did not predict. As the years of formal politics accumulate, the halo around some leaders dims. Corruption scandals emerge. Factional battles within the ruling party grow sharper. Certain names that once stood for sacrifice become associated instead with self-enrichment. In this atmosphere, the moral currency of people like Albertina Sisulu actually increases. She has no grand house built from skimming contracts. She has no luxury cars. Her life remains relatively modest. When people use the word mama for her, it is not flattery, it is an anchor. She becomes more than ever a yardstick by which others are quietly measured. What would Mama Sisulu think of this wasteful spending? Would Mama approve of this decision that burdens the poorest? She does not seek this role, but she understands its weight. She uses it sparingly, choosing her public interventions carefully. When she criticizes, it is not with tabloid outrage, but with a calm that cuts deeper. Leadership, she insists, is not about who speaks from the highest podium, but who shows up in the darkest corners. In the 2000s, as one by one her comrades age or pass away, funerals become a grim drumbeat. She stands at gravesides of men and women who shared prison cells, hiding spots, slogans that were once whispered and are now printed on T-shirts. At some funerals, younger speakers dwell on the glory of the struggle. She, when she speaks, often dwells on its cost. You cannot build a future, she warns, on forgetting those costs. At home, the Sisulu house itself becomes a kind of living archive. Journalists, researchers, young activists, even foreign dignitaries come to visit. They want stories. They want photographs. They want, above all, reassurance that the heroic arc they have learned, apartheid, resistance, victory, is real, despite the messiness of the present. She gives them stories, yes, but she never lets them flatten that arc into something simple. She talks about fear, about sitting awake at night, wondering if the knock on the door will come. She talks about doubt, about the times when internal conflicts within the ANC or divisions between exiles and internal activists threatened to fragment the struggle. She talks about mistakes. The rival in these conversations is myth-making. The temptation to turn the liberation struggle into a fairy tale is strong. Heroes with no flaws, villains with no complexity, epic battles with clean endings. She resists this because she knows that when people believe change only comes from perfect heroes, they excuse themselves from responsibility. Her most radical claim, in a country that increasingly reveres her, is this: I was not extraordinary. I was a woman who refused to run. The years close in. Her body, which survived stress that would break many, begins to betray her in quieter ways. Hospital visits become more frequent. Public appearances are fewer. Sometimes, sitting in her armchair, she drifts between present and memory, carried back to days when her children were small and the world outside the window was lit by the glow of burning tires. In 2011, she is 92. By now, South Africa has hosted a World Cup. Children who were born after 1994 are finishing school. Many know her name more from textbooks than from television news. Hypermarkets and shopping malls stand where once there were dusty lots patrolled by police. The rival she fought has been reduced in their minds to museum exhibits and archive footage. On the evening of June 2, 2011, at her home in Linden, Johannesburg, Albertina Sisulu dies peacefully, surrounded by family. No cell, no interrogation room, no exile in some foreign hotel. She dies at home, in a country whose flag bears the colors of her struggle, governed, however imperfectly, by the movement she helped hold together. The news spreads quickly. Radios interrupt programs. TV anchors lower their voices. For a moment, the constant churn of scandal and celebrity, of markets and sports, pauses. The phrase repeats, from press release to street corner. Mother of the nation. At her official funeral, state leaders line up to pay tribute, former prisoners, current ministers, international guests, all crowd into the space where her life is being turned, in real time, into narrative. They talk about courage, sacrifice, dignity. They speak of her as one of the cornerstones of the democratic South Africa. But outside the marquee, in homes across the townships and suburbs, different tributes unfold. Old nurses remember a colleague who stayed after shifts to comfort families when salaries were gone by mid-month. Former student activists remember arriving, terrified, at her doorstep and being fed before being questioned. Widows remember a woman who sat on their frayed sofas and let them weep without rushing them towards slogans. In these private memories, the rivalry that truly defined her becomes clear. Yes, she fought apartheid. Yes, she outlasted a regime that tried every legal and illegal trick to silence her. But beneath that, every day, in 1,000 small acts, she fought something else. The erosion of human connection under systematic cruelty. The state tried to turn neighbors into informers. She turned neighbors into comrades. The state tried to turn women into silent backbones. She turned them into visible leaders. The state tried to compress life into survival. She insisted on dignity. Her legacy is not a single law or institution. It is a pattern of behavior etched into the country's memory. Show up for each other, especially when it is dangerous, especially when you are tired, especially when time seems against you. In the years after her death, South Africa continues to wrestle with broken promises, with enraging inequalities, with new rivals. She did not live to see in full. Corruption that rots from inside, xenophobic violence, disillusionment that spreads like a slow poison among the young. And yet, whenever people return to the question, what should leadership look like? Her name rises again. Not because she was flawless, not because she never made mistakes, but because, when confronted again and again with the chance to choose comfort or confrontation, she consistently chose the path that put her body, her freedom, and her future at risk for others. The final twist in the rivalry between Albertina Sisulu and the system that sought to erase her is simple and devastating. Apartheid is gone. She is gone. What remains, lodged stubbornly in the country's bloodstream, is her example. In youth meetings in back rooms, someone will say, "We need another Mama Sisulu," and someone wiser will answer, "We need many." The lesson is not to wait for a singular figure to arrive, but to recognize that her power grew not from some mythical destiny, but from daily, disciplined choices made under pressure. The ticking clock that once measured the days to her next banning order, her next arrest, her next chance to see her husband, now hangs above a different generation. How long until they let cynicism win? How long until they allow the hard-won tools of democracy to rust? How long until they remember that the most radical act in any era is to keep caring when indifference is easier? If there is a voice that carries forward from her story, it is not the voice of a saint delivering final wisdom. It is the calm, insistent voice of a nurse who has seen enough wounds to know which ones a country can survive and which it cannot. Do the work. Protect the vulnerable. Organize, even when you are tired. And never assume you have more time than you actually do. Because if a young girl from a mission school, a trainee nurse in Johannesburg, a banned non-person in Soweto can race against one of the most brutal states of the 20th century and win, then the rest of us have no excuse for treating our own time as if it were cheap. The rival has changed names. The deadlines are different, but the challenge she embodied has not. The question is no longer whether Albertina Sisulu will live to see freedom. The question now is whether freedom will live up to Albertina Sisulu.